So would we call this Liberation Day Eve? I suppose the tariffs, of course, are set to take place and begin tomorrow. Reciprocal tariffs from the Trump administration. Charlie Gasparino of the Fox Business Network is here. He's also the pride of the University of Missouri, joining us on 95.7 FM KCMO and streaming on the KCMO Talk Radio app. Charlie, a big picture going into tomorrow. What have you been watching this week as it relates to the economy at large and also what's happening on Wall Street?
Well, I mean, it's uncertainty that's driving markets sideways and up and down and up and down. That's nothing new. Listen, if I was to give any average investor, the advice here, I'd say, well, if you did pretty well in this market, might be time to take some off the table, get into some cash, and then wait until this thing bottoms out or settles out. And then, the Trump economy, with tax cuts coming, hopefully, with deregulation, with a few other things, DOGE cutting the size of the deficit, it should be pretty strong. I mean, we're going to get through this at some point. It's getting through it that's going to be difficult just because of the volatility. I will say this, Trump is a master salesman, day of liberation, wonderful, I'm the hyperbole on the upside and the downside I stay away from. This won't be a day of liberation. It's not doomsday either. If you read the New York Times or even the Wall Street Journal editorial page, which those guys are my friends, I love them. I occasionally write for them, do some book reviews. I mean, you would think that the end of the world is coming. The lead editorial in the Journal right now, a $6 trillion Trump tax increase, ?
Yeah, I saw that.
I just don't think it's the Armageddon, and I don't think it's like Nirvana. And I will say this, depending on how he uses this, and we don't know, he hasn't released a lot of details, whether it's across the board and whether it's how draconian it is, and whether it's a negotiating tool. If this is a negotiating tool, it's not the worst thing in the world. I mean, let's be real clear here. We get screwed everywhere in the world. And it's not just that and you have to compare apples to oranges, apples to apples, right? We go to China and we say, we want fair trade. And they say, okay, we will give you the same tariffs that you put on our stuff. Okay, great. But then what they don't take off, and I'm using China as an example, but it could be any country. What they don't take off is the favorable tax treatment that their businesses get as opposed to our businesses that sell over there, our exports. All the rules that favor buying, not buying imported goods from the U.S. and buying local goods. And that's part of this whole dynamic where we get screwed. And I don't think we need to pay. I know Europe was destroyed during World War II, and so was Japan. But I think those days are kind of over, right? They don't need those favorable tax trade advantages to get their economies moving. We are suffering. Middle America is suffering. I am telling you, it's an old story. When I was at the University of Missouri, we were talking about it, how global trade was destroying small town America and these factory towns. And this is like in the late 80s. I mean, can you imagine? Now J.D. Vance wrote a whole book about it, about how his town was upended by opioids because the manufacturing left. We have to figure out a way. You just can't educate everybody to be coders. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And this thing is, while, some people say we're fighting yesterday's war. Okay, get it. But then again, why are we always at a strategic disadvantage with trade? And all Trump is trying to do so far is, if he's trying to equalize that and ready to cut deals, well, this is going to be a net positive. And that's why if you got some cash while this thing settles out, when the market bottoms out, you can just jump back in.
Yeah. Charlie Gasparino, Fox Business Network, is on KCMO. So I've seen this a lot the last couple of days, Charlie, and it's in reference to a lot of businesses basically front-loading supply to get ahead of the tariffs starting tomorrow. And the suggestion then has been that that could be part of stagflation setting in. Can you explain that? Is that a concern for you? And if so, why or why not?
I don't know if I don't know if that's the concern here. I mean, so what you're saying is because businesses are front loading buying stuff right now,
mm-hmm.
they're bidding cost of raw materials and things of that nature, commodities. And, when the tariffs really hit, we're going to get a slowdown. I mean, that's one of the aspects of stagflation. You have people bidding up prices, inflation, and then you have a slowdown in the economy. I mean, you could also see stagflation. I'm just talking theoretically here. I'm not saying it's going to happen because a lot of this has to do with the Federal Reserve and money supply. But you could also see stagflation when you have a trade war where it leads to increased prices on everything. And then because we're not selling enough overseas, that's 20, whatever it is, 25%, 20% of our economy, you have an economic slowdown, hence stagflation. The last time we had stagflation was over a price shock during the 70s during the Arab oil embargo, because oil was essentially used in just about the manufacturing of everything back then. It's not as big of a deal right now. That said, I mean, there's always a possibility here of stagflation. There's no doubt. That's why the markets are going nuts. We don't know. But again, during the 70s, we had very, loose monetary policy. We had, who was the gentleman's name back in the 70s? Arthur Burns. He'll go down in history as stoking inflation because, he had to come in and, he was lowering interest rates. He was printing money to deal with the stag part of the stagflation, and that led to more inflation. We've learned that lesson. So you do have a Federal Reserve that is that will not lower interest rates, right? Mm-hmm. They're not going to print. Housing might be more difficult to buy. Well, it won't be more difficult to buy if you have cash, but if you don't have cash to borrow, that would be more difficult. And that's part of the equation here. I'm not convinced that's going to happen. I don't know. I mean, this is like we're in another sort of dimension here in this sense, and I think that's what's spooking the markets as well. We've had the same sort of broadly economic framework now for, since Ronald Reagan, more or less. A broadly free trade. We had taxes, that were a certain level. The Democrats would love to tax everything. We spent a lot of money. Every administration has gone on a spending spree more and more and more and more since Reagan. Ballooning deficits. The only time we didn't have deficits was during the dot-com bubble, which produced a massive amount of economic activity. And by the way, you could get that out of AI. We don't know yet. And that would be the savior of all this, I should point out. And by the way, a little good news. I haven't heard NVIDIA say that they're going to cut back on their AI R&D. So that should tell you something. There's still a growth aspect here of the new economy. So, Trump comes in and does literally a U-turn with this tariff stuff. And there's going to be adjustments. Now, I think politically we can all talk about why did he start here? Why didn't he wait until we had tax cuts? And I meant tariffs, not taxes. Why did he, why did he wait for the tariffs? Why didn't he do the tax cuts first? I guess is the best way to put it. And that's a political calculation that I'm not, I'm not in charge. But he did throw the whole ball of wax up in the air in a major way, and the markets are trying to figure it out right now.
Yeah. Now, what about an update on Doge? Charlie Gasparino, Fox Business on KCMO. Last thing here, Charlie, on Doge in particular, you mentioned it earlier. Cutting these deficits will help fix the inflation problem because we're not printing money and spending money that we do not have. And, getting folks who have been working and spending money on behalf of the government into the private sector should theoretically help. I mean, it's just basic economics. So how far does this thing go as Elon continues to be under attack? And how successful do you think they'll ultimately end up being?
I think they're going to be successful. Now, how do you measure success, right? I mean, do they cut $500 billion over the next 10 years? Do they hit his mark of $1 trillion? Do they cut $100 billion? I mean, I don't know. We do have $36 trillion in debt. The bottom line is, though, if you use Doge principles on every government program, I'm not saying you stop cutting checks on Social Security. You will, or Medicaid or Medicare, which is where the fraud has to be. That's a government-run system that is on autopilot, right? Medicare, Medicaid. Yep. Get the fraud and abuse out of there. Make those systems accountable to where people aren't, like where the government isn't paying. I mean, I've heard reports where, if the government it pays for people that aren't even alive, for some of this stuff. So, I mean, when you cut that stuff out, you'll see savings. Mm-hmm. I mean, no doubt. But I think what people have to realize. I had dinner with a friend of mine who said, Trump is getting involved in these tariffs. It's horrible. I'm sick of it. She voted for Trump. I just wish he'd stop taking taxes out of Social Security, which she's going to retire very soon and be on Social Security. And I said, you do realize that we have $36 trillion in debt. I mean, at some point, the gimmies have got to stop. I mean, $6 trillion in debt. Joe Biden was one of the worst presidents ever. I think the more we find out about him and he and Kamala Harris, the more Kamala Harris's political career is going to go, because she's just pathetically stupid. But they spent like crazy on stuff we didn't need, and basically to buy votes.
Yeah,
they just like $300 billion extra Biden's last couple of months in office, just to keep the economy sort of, a sugar high on the economy, so we can maybe get her elected and the markets wouldn't implode. I mean, that's kind of the type of people we were dealing with.
Mm-hmm. No, you're right.
So, Trump was left with a real pile of what, out there mid-Missouri. They know what manure is all about. And I've walked through it plenty of times on farms up there. But he was handled like a rough hand to begin with.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt about it. We will see what Liberation Day actually looks like come tomorrow. Charlie Gasparino, Fox Business, Mizzou's finest. Always great to have him on KCMO in Kansas City. Thank you so much, Charlie. We'll be following along, and we always appreciate the time.
Thank you.
All right, Charlie Gasparino. Great work on KCMO Talk Radio.